World War II was the largest and bloodiest conflict in history. More than 60 countries were involved and more than 70 million people died. But how did it all begin? What led the world to descend into total chaos? Today, we're going to tell you this story step by step. A story of power, ambition, horror, and hope. Stay until the end. After World War I, the world was devastated. Millions died, economies were destroyed, and countries were humiliated. Germany was one of the hardest hit. The Treaty of Versailles forced it to pay huge reparations, lose territories, and accept full blame for the conflict. This generated much hatred. The German economy collapsed. In the 1920s and 1930s, there was poverty, unemployment, and despair. Amidst the chaos, a man emerged who promised to restore Germany to its former glory, Adolf Hitler. With powerful words and hatred disguised as pride, he won the hearts of millions. And so, little by little, Nazism began to grow. Hitler didn't come to power by force. He was democratically elected chancellor in 1933. But once in power, he eliminated all opposition and declared himself dictator. He used propaganda, fear, and extreme nationalism. He created a totalitarian state where only his word ruled. One of the pillars of Nazism was anti-Semitism. Hitler blamed Jews for all of Germany's ills. Persecution, racist laws, and violence soon began. But this was only the beginning. Hitler had a much bigger plan: to conquer Europe. Meanwhile, tensions were mounting in other countries as well. Italy was under the control of Benito Mussolini, a fascist dictator. In Japan, the military controlled the government and wanted to expand into Asia. 3 countries, 3 authoritarian regimes, and they would soon form a dangerous alliance. In 1936, Germany and Italy signed the Rome-Berlin Axis Treaty. Shortly after, Japan joined. Thus, the Axis was born. Its objective was clear: to expand throughout the world, destroy communism, and challenge Western democracies. The storm was beginning to gather. In 1938, Hitler annexed Austria without firing a single shot. It was the Anschluss. Then he set his sights on Czechoslovakia. European powers like the United Kingdom and France didn't want another war, so they let him do it. It was a policy called appeasement, a fatal mistake. Hitler promised he didn't want any more territories, but he was lying. Secretly, Germany signed a pact with the Soviet Union, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They agreed not to attack each other and to divide Poland. The world was on the brink of an even bigger war. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, the United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany. Thus officially began World War II. But the worst was yet to come. Before the war, Hitler already had a dream: to unite all German-speaking peoples into a single country. Austria was one of them. Many Austrians spoke German, shared culture and history with Germany, and were disillusioned with its weak government. There was poverty, unemployment, and a desire for order. That made everything easier. In March 1938, Hitler pressured the Austrian government to allow a referendum. But fearing loss, Germany sent troops and occupied the country before the people could vote. Many Austrians greeted the soldiers with flowers and flags. The Anschluss was a success for Hitler, without a shot being fired. Austria was now part of the Reich. After Austria, Hitler looked to Czechoslovakia, especially the Sudetenland. There lived a large minority of ethnic Germans who, Hitler believed, were being mistreated. Many Germans in the Sudetenland felt ignored by the Czech government and wanted to join the Reich, hoping for better opportunities. Hitler used this sentiment to create tension. He claimed that Germans were oppressed in Czechoslovakia. Protests, violence, and international pressure followed. The United Kingdom and France, seeking to avoid another war, convinced the Czech government to cede the Sudetenland to Germany in 1938 during the Munich Conference. The British and French leaders, Neville Chamberlain and Edouard Daladier, believed this would prevent a war. They thought Hitler would stop. Chamberlain even said, "I bring peace for our time." But it wasn't peace. It was just the silence before the storm. Hitler wasn't going to stop. In March 1939, Hitler broke his promise. He didn't just want the Sudetenland, he wanted all of Czechoslovakia. He took advantage of the country's internal divisions and the conflicts between Czechs and Slovaks. Germany invaded without much resistance. Many Slovaks wanted to secede and supported the Nazis. Czechoslovakia was dismembered. This time, Hitler couldn't justify the invasion with the German people. Czechoslovakia wasn't a German country. Therefore, the Western powers began to understand that Hitler didn't just want to unite Germans, but to conquer Europe. Trust was shattered. War seemed inevitable. As Hitler advanced, he did something unexpected. He signed a pact with his enemy, Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact shocked the world. Germany and the USSR promised not to attack each other, but secretly agreed to divide Eastern Europe, including Poland. Why did Stalin agree? Because the USSR wasn't prepared for a war against Germany. Stalin needed time to build up his army, and Hitler wanted to avoid a two-front war like World War I. Both gained time, and Poland would be the first casualty. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west. They used blitzkrieg, or lightning warfare, tanks, planes and troops moving quickly. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. Poland was crushed within weeks. And then, Europe exploded. On September 3rd, 1939, the United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany. They kept their promise to protect Poland. But in reality, they didn't do much at first. For months, there was almost no fighting in the West. This period was called the Phony War, or Sitzkrieg. Why didn't they attack immediately? Because they still remembered the horrors of World War I. The British and French leaders weren't ready for another all-out war. Meanwhile, Hitler used that time to prepare his next offensive to the west. But first, Germany secured its resources. In April 1940, it invaded Denmark and Norway. It needed access to Swedish iron ore, which passed through Norway. It also wanted to protect its fleet and control the North Sea. Both countries fell quickly. Then on May 10, 1940, Hitler launched a massive offensive against Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg. All were neutral, but Germany attacked them in order to reach France. It was another blitzkrieg. The Allies couldn't stop them. Everything was happening so fast. The German army bypassed the French defences at the Maginot Line and entered the Ardennes forests, where no one expected an attack. It was a masterstroke. The Allied soldiers were surrounded. It was a major strategic coup for the Nazis. Thousands of British and French soldiers were trapped on the beach at Dunkirk. But thanks to a miraculous operation called Operation Dynamo, more than 300,000 soldiers managed to escape in boats and small craft. It was a defeat, but also a symbol of hope. In June 1940, France could no longer resist. The French government signed an armistice with Germany. Hitler had it signed in the same carriage where Germany had accepted surrender in World War I. It was his way of getting revenge. France was divided in two. The northern half was occupied by the Nazis. In the south, the Vichy government, a French regime collaborating with Hitler, was formed. Many French accepted this occupation. Others joined the resistance. The pride of France had been crushed. With France defeated, only one enemy remained in Western Europe, the United Kingdom. Hitler thought it would accept peace. But Winston Churchill, the new British Prime Minister, said he would never surrender. He promised to fight on the beaches, in the fields, and in the streets. Hitler decided to invade the United Kingdom from the air. In July 1940, the Battle of Britain began. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, bombed cities, factories and airfields, but the British resisted. They used radar, brave pilots, and a lot of determination. German bombing raids were constant. London was attacked for 57 consecutive nights in what became known as the Blitz. Thousands of civilians died, but the British spirit was unbroken. Churchill said, "Never did so much owe so much to so few," in honor of the pilots defending the skies. The RAF, Royal Air Force, managed to repel the Luftwaffe. Germany lost many planes and pilots. Hitler realized he couldn't conquer England from the air. It was his first major defeat, so he changed his plans and turned his sights to the east. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched the largest operation in history, the invasion of the Soviet Union, dubbed Operation Barbarossa. Hitler broke the pact with Stalin. More than 3 million German soldiers crossed the border. A brutal war had begun. Why did Hitler invade the USSR? Because he hated communism, wanted to destroy Stalin and conquer Lebensraum for his empire. He dreamed of controlling the resource-rich lands of the East, but he underestimated Soviet resilience and the Russian winter. The Nazis advanced rapidly. They took Ukraine and Belarus and surrounded Leningrad. They also came close to Moscow, but they were unprepared for the harsh winter. The cold, mud, and lack of supplies made the German troops begin to suffer. The battle for Moscow was intense. The Soviets resisted fiercely. Stalin ordered them not to give an inch. He even moved entire factories east to continue producing weapons. In December 1941, a major Soviet counteroffensive forced the Nazis to retreat. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan was already at war. Since 1937, it had invaded China and committed massacres like the one in Nanjing. It sought to expand across the Pacific. But there was one obstacle: the United States. So it made a risky decision to attack first. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It was a surprise attack. More than 2,400 people died. Ships and planes were destroyed. It was a severe blow to the United States, but it didn't defeat them. It woke them up. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. Shortly after, Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, declared war on the United States. Now, the war was truly global. Europe, Africa, Asia, and America were all involved. The entry of the United States changed everything. Its economy, its technology, and its military began to tip the balance. President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared, "This will be a war for liberty." And so, the path to victory began, although there was still a long way to go. After the United States entered the war, the Allies began to coordinate better. Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and later Stalin formed the Grand Alliance against the Axis. Their goal: to defeat Germany, Italy, and Japan. In North Africa, the Axis forces, led by German General Erwin Rommel, were advancing rapidly. He was nicknamed the Desert Fox. But the British, under Bernard Montgomery, were preparing to resist. Africa was key for control of the Suez Canal. In 1942, the Second Battle of El Alamein was fought. The British achieved a major victory and began pushing the Germans and Italians westward. It was a turning point. From then on, the Axis began to lose ground in Africa. Meanwhile, the United States landed in Morocco and Algeria in Operation Torch. The Allies were now attacking from the east and west. The Axis forces were trapped in Tunisia. In 1943, more than 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered. With North Africa liberated, the Allies decided to attack the soft underbelly of Europe, Italy. In July 1943, they invaded Sicily. It was a successful operation. Shortly after, Mussolini's government fell. The Italian people no longer wanted war or fascism. Mussolini was arrested, and the new Italian government signed a peace treaty with the Allies. But Hitler refused to accept this betrayal. He ordered the occupation of northern Italy and rescued Mussolini on a special mission. A puppet regime was created under Nazi control, the Salo Republic. The fighting in Italy was fierce. Mountains, rain, and German resistance slowed the Allied advance. Cities like Monte Cassino were the scene of bloody battles. Rome wasn't liberated until June 1944. The road north was long and painful. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets resisted fiercely. In 1942, the most brutal battle of the entire war began, Stalingrad. Hitler wanted to take this symbolic city, but Stalin ordered it to be defended at all costs. The streets became battlefields. For months, the soldiers fought house by house, meter by meter. Winter arrived, and the Soviets surrounded the Germans. General Paulus asked for permission to retreat, but Hitler told him to hold. In February 1943, the German army surrendered. It was a disaster for the Third Reich. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad changed the course of the war. For the first time, a large Nazi army was completely destroyed. From then on, the Soviets began advancing westward. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. The German surrender at Stalingrad wasn't just due to the cold or Soviet strength. It was a combination of Hitler's mistakes and impossible conditions. Hitler insisted on not allowing a retreat, even though his troops were starved, out of ammunition, and surrounded. Furthermore, the Russian winter froze weapons and soldiers. Many died of hunger and disease. Paulus, the German general, knew that continuing to fight was suicidal. Therefore, he surrendered in February 1943. There was no way out. After the defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler refused to accept reality. He believed he could still win if he achieved victory on the Eastern Front. Therefore, he ordered a new offensive in 1943 at Kursk, where there was a large concentration of Soviet troops. His idea was to surround and destroy them. But the Soviets knew the attack was coming. Thanks to spies and intercepted radios, they prepared massive defenses, trenches, mines, and cannons. The Battle of Kursk was the largest tank battle in history. The Nazis failed. They lost many men and vehicles. Why was Kursk so important? Because it was the last time Germany attempted a major offensive in the East. From then on, the Soviets seized the initiative. They advanced, recapturing city after city, driven by the desire to avenge what Hitler had done to them. Meanwhile, in the West, the Allies were preparing an invasion of France. They wanted to open a second front to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union. Thus was born the most ambitious plan of the war, the Normandy landings, also known as D-Day. Why Normandy? Because it was less heavily defended than Calais, where the Nazis expected an attack. The Allies used a grand strategy of deception, fake operations, cardboard armies, and false messages to confuse Hitler. The deception worked. On June 6, 1944, thousands of ships crossed the English Channel. British, American, and Canadian troops landed on 5 beaches. It was carnage, especially at Omaha, where the soldiers were met with intense fire. But they held their own. The success of D-Day was due to months of preparation, precise intelligence, courage, and air support. The Nazis were surprised, poorly positioned, and had their best divisions tied up in the east. Thus began the liberation of Western Europe. With Normandy secured, the Allies began liberating France. In August 1944, Paris was liberated. Why was this so symbolic? Because it represented the rebirth of freedom in Europe. The streets were filled with flags, hugs, and tears. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviets advanced at a rapid pace. They recovered lost territories and liberated countries under Nazi rule. Hungary, Poland, Romania, all began to fall. The Red Army was unstoppable. Stalin wanted to reach Berlin before the Allies. But Hitler refused to give up. In December 1944, he launched his last major offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge. He took advantage of the bad weather, surprise, and Allied weakness in that area. At first it worked, but the Allies soon counterattacked and pushed him back. The Battle of the Bulge was very costly for Germany. They lost soldiers, tanks, and planes that could no longer be replaced. It was their last attempt to turn the tide of the war in the West. From that moment on, the Nazis only retreated. The noose around Germany tightened. In February 1945, the Allied leaders, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, met in Yalta, Crimea. There they discussed how to end the war and how to divide Europe afterward. They knew that Germany would fall, but they also knew that another struggle would follow, the Cold War. Stalin wanted